All right, everyone. Of course, thank you very much for tuning in to another edition of the Victorious Ones podcast. As we're talking about NFL top tens, my NFL, my top 10 list, my top 10 list of players of each position all time. And so, I mean, so of course, when it came to this, it was, it was definitely, I'll say it was definitely a pretty tough, certainly very, very tough, very tough decision to make. Now, when it came to my top five, it's certainly much easier. But then by the time you start to, navigate from like six through 10, that's where, that's where some of the, some of the some of the struggles started to really kick in. But just like with my other list, this is all about, the greatest players of each position, as far as those who left the greatest impact, who what the greatest influence and everything like that. So just like with anything else, I definitely like to give honor to pioneers on my list, and this was no different. And by the way, before I go any further, for those that are watching live, of course I'm recording. Of course they may be watching on YouTube. This is one of those special YouTube edition episodes. Of course if you're on YouTube, go to youtube.com/King Von Jr. youtube.com/King Von Jr. If just make sure to like and subscribe as well. Of course, for more content. And without further ado, I definitely want to go into my list finally of of my top 10, top 10 NFL wide receivers of all time. So not everything's going to be considered, like pretty much considered a favorite, but this is just just those who who ultimately left the biggest mark on the game as we know it. So number 10, I'm going to go with, of course, Chargers legend, and later on a Super Bowl champion with the Cowboys, Football Hall of Famer class was 1978. Lance Allworth, over the course of 137 games, he caught 542 receptions, 10,266 yards, and 85 touchdowns. And the thing is, of course, he was a very innovative wide receiver. Because, especially when it came to the Chargers, when it came to the Chargers offense at the time, and so you know what I mean. So like especially when it came to what you could do with with a wide open downfield passing game. And so it was like with the Air Coryell offense or something like that. And so Lance Allworth was the franchise receiver at that time. He was very instrumental for the Chargers' success, especially when they were especially during those AFL years. Of course, like the pre NFL merger era, things like that. So, so he was definitely one of the brighter stars of of the American Football League at the time, especially when it came to, at that time, the San Diego Chargers. You know what I mean? So, so of course, I guess he was definitely one of the premier receivers. During the like I said, all throughout the '60s, and and of course, like very early '70s, where he was a key part of that first Cowboys Super Bowl. And so so of course with that, he was number 19 for the Chargers. So of course with that, Lance Allworth is number 10 on my list, and at number 9, I'm going to go with the guy who is the original Seahawks GOAT, if you will. I mean, he was a Seahawks, first like all time great franchise player. And so, and the thing is, at that time, you could very much say he was the premier wide receiver for his era, and he was one of those guys that Jerry Rice had to surpass. Um, Throughout his, like not completely throughout his career, but but the thing is, he was one of those guys that at that time, at that time, when a guy like Jerry Rice was just coming in, this guy was at the top of the all time receivers, like all time receivers list, and and the thing is, and the thing about him was that he was this guy was an undersized receiver, much like he was, if anything, he was the precursor to your Wes Welkers and Julia Edelman's. So and of course and like I said, let me slow down. he was, like I said, for the Seahawks at the time, from 1976 to 1989, this guy was pretty much the end all be all of the Seahawks offense, or really just the Seahawks franchise at that time in and of itself, and eventually made the Hall of Fame class of 1995. Over the course of 200 games, he had 819 receptions for 13,089 yards and 100 touchdowns. And he was one of the first 100 touchdown players or 100 touchdown receivers. Like I said, one of the first 100 touchdown receivers of all time. And at the time they retired, he held every major, like I said, he held every major receiving record in NFL history at that time. So, so of course, not this guy. And the funny thing is, imagine if Russell Wilson had this guy as his receiver. Imagine what he could do if he was on that Seahawks. If he was in this modern NFL, in this modern NFL game with that Seahawks offense. You know what I mean? So, and the thing is, I'm pretty sure he would have dreamed to have a quarterback like Russell Wilson throwing him the ball. But even without that, this guy still made an indelible mark on the NFL. And that is none other than Steve Largent at number 9 on my list. And so, of course, at number 8 on my list, of the all-time great, of the NFL's, number 8 on this list, for me, when it comes to the all-time greatest, like all-time greatest receivers in NFL history. This guy, was the franchise. He was the franchise receiver for the Indianapolis Colts. Like I said, he was very instrumental when it came to the Colts winning that Super Bowl. And, it was a Super Bowl 41 when they defeated the Chicago Bears. But the thing is, like all throughout his time, like I said, all throughout his career, he was Peyton Manning's primary target. And it's just like the chemistry that they had was absolutely incredible. And this guy was ultimate go-to receiver. And so and the thing about it is that he was responsible for almost a quarter of Peyton Manning's 539 career touchdown passes. That shows you how amazing, how special this guy was as a wide receiver. And the numbers speak for themselves over the course of 190 games. This guy had 1,102 receptions for 14,580 yards and 128 touchdowns. Made the Hall of Fame. Like I said, made the Hall of Fame class of 2016. He's also on the NFL all-time 100 team. And also, of course, the guys before him on this list, Lance Allworth and Steve Largent also made the the NFL's 100 all-time team. Like I said, let me go and slow down. But like I said, like I said, much like them, like I said, much like the guys before him on this list, this guys made the NFL's all-time 100 team, and for good reason, because the numbers speak for themselves. He's a multi-time Pro Bowler, multi-time All-Pro. Like I said, in my estimation, when it comes to the Colts, for me, he's their all-time greatest receiver. And so, there's nothing more that needs to be said other than number 8 on this list is Marvin Harrison. Like I said, the numbers speak for themselves, and I've seen Marvin Harrison, for myself, like I said, for myself growing up, and especially for the era that he played in, even though he was in the era with the likes of Randy Moss and Terrell Owens, this guy, Marvin still found a way to shine. He still found a way to like I said, to make his own mark, to stand out in his own way, and what I mean, and so for that, he should be rewarded, with a spot on this list. And number 7, this may raise a few eyebrows, especially from the more traditional fans, if you will, and so And when I say raise eyebrows, they're gonna be people, when I read these numbers, they're gonna think like, for one, why is he even on this list? And two, there's some people may think that he's probably too low on this list. So I try to at least find a common medium, if you will. But like I said, this guy was certainly part of the very very early era of the NFL. He was a cornerstone for the very 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 early Green Bay Packers teams. I'm talking about like even as far back as the 30s and 40s. So for somebody to have a career that transcends so much to that point where they're still considered one of the arguably top 5, top 10 receivers of all time speaks volumes. And he was the only player to be enshrined in the very first Hall of Fame class. And over the course of 116 games, this guy had like 488 receptions, 7,991 yards. That seems pedestrian, especially certainly by today's standards, with 99 touchdowns. And for him to have that many touchdowns with very few receptions and receiving yards, that's incredible. And the thing is, he was a pioneer when it came. Like I said, he was certainly a pioneer wide receiver. When he likes, I said that like this. When it came to pioneer, when it came to wide receivers, he's certainly that pioneer innovator category. Because he was somebody that really, he was one of those first players that really opened up the passing game for that era. And like I said, once again, those 99 touchdowns speak for themselves. You know what I mean? That's certainly nothing to nothing to quite sneeze at, if you will. And so so like I'll say it like this, like I said early on, for a long time, this guy was the benchmark when it came to receivers. And like I said, once again, like during Jerry Rice's climb to greatness, this was the guy that he definitely had to surpass, other than Steve Largent. And like I said, this is the early Green Bay Packers, even long before Bart Starr. And so what I mean, so like I said, for this guy, to still have, like I said, have a legacy that stands the test of time like this. I'm going on and on. You know what I mean? I'm building suspense. But at number 7 on my list is Don Hutson. I put him on here for the same reasons I'll put, like when it comes to NBA, the same reasons why I'll put someone like George Mikan on my top 10 centers list, or like Bob Pettit for power forwards, Bob Cousy for point guards, things like that. This is one of the guys that was one of the building blocks for the NFL. And the reason why I really couldn't put him even higher is just because of the lack of competition. What I mean. As far as that, and also, and the thing is, even though he's one of those guys that modernized the game for that time, but at the same time, because of the fact that the game has advanced, so much further than where it was at that time. It's just like not even close. So I still at least give his resume at least enough respect to put him on this list. And I think he's like a 3-time or like 4-time leader in receiving at that time. So for him, so like for the era, for him to be a multi-time leader in receiving, so that's the reason why he happens to crack this list. So at number 7, I think that's a very common ground. Number 7, I have Don Hutson as far as the top 10 greatest receivers of all time. At number 6 on this list, he was the precursor when it came to Randy Moss in Minnesota. This is the guy that really set the table for this is a guy that really set the table for a guy like Moss to shine later on. And the thing about it is that had he not played in the same era of of number 80 in San Francisco, Mr. Jerry Rice. Had he not playing that same era, like I say, along with the likes of Jerry Rice or even Michael Irvin in Dallas, you know what I mean? So, if anything, that this guy would, I think the perception of his career would be much better. But because he played in Jerry's shadow at that time, in a market that nobody was really checking for, that those are certain things that from his take points off his ranking. And also because of the fact, now granted, I still give him respect for the way that he carried the Vikings. Let's just call it what it is. This guy certainly carried them, carried the Vikings during those years. Where he was the most consistent player, most constant player on that team. You might as well say he's pretty much like one man army. And the way the Vikings system was set up, they were like the anti Cowboys and 49ers in the sense that they didn't have a consistent Hall of Fame quarterback. Now, granted, of course, granted, they had Warren Moon, at least for a cup of coffee over there, but not on a regular basis. They had Randall Cunningham later on, after he made, after he made that return. But when it came to having a consistent Hall of Fame quarterback all throughout his career, this guy didn't, that wasn't fortunate enough to have that. So so he didn't have this, like I said, he didn't have the same opportunities for success, as guys like Rice and Irvin, you know what I mean. So as far as that, because the fact that they had amazing quarterbacks, but like I said, that's a whole nother story. But at the same time, like I said, this guy certainly carried his quarterback or quarterbacks as far as he could go. And once again, especially when it comes to points being taken off as far as his ranking. The thing about it is that this guy never made it to the Super Bowl. The closest he got to the Super Bowl was, at least the closest he got to even, the closest that he got to possibly make it into the Super Bowl was, was the NFC Championship game in 1998, where the Vikings lost to the Falcons. And so but even with that, during his heyday, he had back-to-back seasons where he had 122 receptions, and so he certainly carried the Vikings. He certainly carried the Vikings during a very rough patch, but at the same time, going to the Vikings certainly saved his career. Because during those first 3 seasons in Philadelphia, like I said, he wasn't necessarily setting the world on fire, but like I said, once he went to Minnesota, it was a complete turnaround for him. And like I said, he was a multi-time Pro Bowler, multi-time All Pro. Like I said, All Pro. He finally made the Hall of Fame in the class of 2013. You know what I mean? And so and this guy would have, like I said, once again, not to sound like a broken record, he would have been the most dominant receiver in the 90s if not for Jerry Rice. But his numbers aren't too bad. Over the course of 234 career games, of course, over the course of a 16-season career, he had 1,101 receptions for 13,899 yards, 130 touchdowns. Over the course of a 16-year career, from first starting off with the Philadelphia Eagles, and of course, most famously with the Minnesota Vikings, and then one last season with the Miami Dolphins, and of course this. And like I said, of course, much later on in his career, he formed a great, tag team duo, if you will, wide receiver with Randy Moss. And that 1998 Vikings team was absolutely incredible. In my estimation, probably the greatest team to never win a Super Bowl. And at number 6 on this list is none other than Vikings legend Cris Carter. That's number 6 on my list. At number 5, this is like I said, this is I say like this is like the most ironclad part of my list. At number 5, this guy was the most dominant receiver of the 2010s era, in my estimation. And he certainly had the perfect nickname for it, Megatron. and because of the fact that he had the size, the strength, the speed, the athleticism. If anything, his freakish athleticism rivaled that of Randy Moss. You know, and this guy only played for 9 seasons with the Lions. And if anything, you could pretty much say he was if anything, you pretty much say he was the Barry Sanders of wide receivers. He was an amazing player that carried a very subpar team, but he was an outstanding player that carried a very subpar team, and he left. He left with so many more questions that had never been answered. And he left fans wondering, what if? Even though he only played 9 seasons, he had an incredible impact, an amazing impact on the game. And so over the course of that 9-season career, all with the Lions, by the way, over the course of 135 games, he had 731 receptions for 11,619 yards, 83 touchdowns. And one could only imagine, what if he played even longer? Or what if he was on a better team? And he was a first ballot Hall of Famer, without question, class of 2021. And of course, like the nickname was already a giveaway. Without further ado, none other than Megatron himself, Calvin Johnson, at number 5. And the reason, like I said, the reason why I rank him so high is that even though he didn't crack the 750 to 800 reception mark, but at the same time, like I said, the impact that he left within such a short span of time speaks for itself. Pretty much, I say like this, as far as like the greatest receivers of that late 2000s, 2010 era. This guy was neck and neck with the guy that's number 4 on this list. And at number 4, this guy is the GOAT when it comes to the Arizona Cardinals, without question. Over the course of a 17-year career, like I said, over the course of a 17-year career, with 263 games, he had 1,432 receptions for 17,492 yards and 121 touchdowns. So he was pretty much on the doorstep. Well, not too much on the doorstep, but if anything, numbers wise, I think he was like, if anything, numbers wise, as far as just receivers concerned, he's second behind Rice. Like I said, I'll say, like, excluding Tony Gonzalez numbers, when it comes to receivers, this guy was second all time behind Rice. When when it came to I think when it came to receptions and receiving yards, and it's mainly because of his longevity, and of course he also made the NFL 100 all-time team back in 2019, and without a doubt, he's definitely a first ballot Hall of Famer, and he led the Arizona Cardinals to a Super Bowl appearance, only for them to lose to the Pittsburgh Steelers. You know what I mean? And so plus he's the youngest player in NFL history to catch 1,000 passes in a career, and second all time in yards and receptions, as I said before. You know what I mean? And so let me slow down. This guy, was absolutely humanitarian. You know what I mean? He was, like I said, very, very upstanding player. You know what I mean? He was the model player, model citizen. As far as just pretty much those Good Samaritans type of players, things like that. And if anything, if you're looking for an NFL player to be like a quintessential role model, somebody to look up to, this guy, is certainly at or near the top of the list, and that is none other than Larry Fitzgerald at number 4. At number 3 on this list, certainly one of the more polarizing figures in NFL history. This is a guy that that personifies that personifies the media's label of, let's say, prima donna, as far as cocky, arrogant, wide receiver, things like that. So, so if anything, um, the media narrative, as well as, his locker room reputation, I would say like this, his locker room reputation certainly matches the media narrative. And side note, I wish he would have wish this guy would have showed up at the Hall of Fame, just to prove the doubters wrong. But the thing is, but because he was absent from the Hall of Fame, that just fed into his previous reputation. You know, um, but that does not take away from the fact that he's certainly one of the all-time greatest receivers that this game has ever seen. Um, you know, Numbers wise, he's certainly a first ballot Hall of Famer. But like I said, but because of his reputation, um, you know, but because of so many burned bridges, because of so many people that he rubbed the wrong way along the way, and things like that. Um, those are I think those are the main reasons why um, he was held back. But like I said, numbers wise, side by side against anybody, he's definitely the first ballot Hall of Famer. And he spent a variety of stints, of course, first with the San Francisco 49ers, then with the Philadelphia Eagles, as he helped lead them to the Super Bowl. And if anything, he carried the Eagles in that game. While Donovan McNabb was thrown up and everything like that. I said, this guy was playing with a bad ankle. And so it's like, regardless of his persona, that's one thing you cannot take away. You know what I mean? And plus, going back to his time in San Francisco, he actually set or broke NFL record for most receptions in a single game, like 20 receptions in 2000, which happened to be Jerry Rice's last game. You know what I mean? This guy had 20 receptions in Rice's last game, and it was a game against the Bears, or whatever. And but like I said, but the thing is, he was the successor to Rice when it came to the 49ers, even though they never won a Super Bowl. Like I said, even though they never won a Super Bowl during his tenure, but but at the same time, he was side by side with Randy Moss in terms of that fight, for the top spot of receivers, for like pretty much really for that 2000s generation, you know, and I'll say like this: this was a guy who never met a microphone that he didn't like. You know what I mean? So like I said, he's a 5-time first team All Pro, 6-time Pro Bowler, 3-time NFL receiving touchdowns leader. He was part of the 2000s All Decade team. And of course, this is none other. And another thing also, of course, before I go any further, over the course of 219 games, this guy had 1,078 receptions, 15,934 yards, 153 touchdowns. So like I said, like as far as drama aside, sideshow aside, this guy put forth a Hall of Fame worthy career. And of course, this is none other. I think those that are watching pretty much guessed it at this point. None other than number 81 himself, T.O. Terrell Owens. So that obviously leaves me with 2 spots left. And at number 2 on this list, I think it's pretty much a dead giveaway at this point. This is a guy that obviously took the torch from Cris Carter, and became the marquee franchise player for the Minnesota Vikings. Carried that team on his back. He was named to the NFL 2000s All Decade team, part of the NFL 100th anniversary All Time team. Ever since he's retired, he's become a commentator himself. Of course, he was the NFL Offensive Rookie of the Year in 1998. He's NFL Comeback Player of the Year in 2007 with the Patriots. 4-time First Team All Pro from 98, 2000, 2003, 2007. So he made First Team All Pro as a rookie. I mean, what else do you need to say? 6-time Pro Bowler from 98 through 2000, then 2002, 2003, 2007. And of course, he's a 5-time NFL receiving touchdowns leader in 1998, 2000, 2003, and 2007. You know what I mean? And this guy, you could certainly make a case for arguably being the greatest Viking of all time. And so of course after his time in Minnesota was done, um, people wrote him off when he was with the Raiders. Then then received a rejuvenation, a redemption when it came to the Patriots, and of course he was instrumental when it came to that 2007 season where he broke Jerry Rice's record for most touchdowns in a single season with 23, and of course that season they went 18-1. They went undefeated, but lost where it mattered the most. So that was a very crushing blow to his resume. You know what I mean? So and of course, in his very last season, he played with the San Francisco 49ers for one last bite at the apple, where they end up losing to the Baltimore Ravens in the Blackout Bowl. And of course, this guy was a first ballot Hall of Famer, class of 2018, where he was the headliner, of course. And by far, I would have to say he had the best speech of that night as well. And of course, like me slow down, his, and of course, over the course of his career, over the course of 218 games, he had 982 receptions for 15,292 yards, 156 touchdowns. One of my favorite players of all time. You know what I mean? And of course, I was a huge, major fan of his growing up. And of course, he was the original cover star for those NFL 2K games, from NFL 2K, 2K1, and 2K2. You know, and he was the biggest reason why I bought those games. And like I said, and plus the fact that the fact that his name is in the pop culture lexicon. When somebody says you got Moss, you know what I mean? I mean, what else do you need to say? You know what I mean? And so like I said, without further ado, number 2 on this list obviously is Randy Moss. And number 1, what else needs to be said for those that are watching on YouTube? Number 1, it's already a dead giveaway. I'm already wearing his jersey. Side note, even though I'm a Cowboys fan, but at the same time, I still respect greatness. Not like I said, even though my primary team is the Cowboys, my thing is I also follow players as well. I also follow all-time great players, and I wear this guy's jersey as a sign of respect. Because he's my favorite NFL player of all time, the greatest wide receiver of all time. And pretty much, those that are watching, you already know, like before I even mention this dude's name, let me slow down. Over the course of and this guy had a remarkable 20-year career. You know what I mean? And so, like I said, a 20-year career full of discipline, full of dedication, full of hard work. You know what I mean? And this guy was able to bring the best out of his teammates. And the thing is, even though he had 2 Hall of Fame quarterbacks, he found a way to bring the best out of them as well. And over the course of a remarkable 20-year career, he's a 3-time Super Bowl champion from Super Bowls 23, 24, and 29. He was a Super Bowl MVP in Super Bowl 23, 2-time NFL Offensive Player of the Year in 1987, 93, 10-time first-team All-Pro from 1986 to 90, and then again in 92 through 96, second-team All-Pro in 2000, second-team All-Pro in 2002 at the age of 40, by the way. 13-time Pro Bowler from 86 through 96, and then again in 98 and then 2002. 6-time NFL receiving yards leader from 1986, 89, 90, 93 through 95. 2-time NFL receptions leader in 1990 and 96. 6-time NFL receiving touchdowns leader in 86, 87, 89 through 91, and then again in 93. And of course he was the one to originally set the record for most touchdown receptions in a season with 22, and that was during a strike shortened season 87. And the following year, he won his first Super Bowl, as I mentioned before. Like I said, won the first of back-to-back Super Bowls, and then went back later on with Steve Young as the quarterback. And so he was a perennial top receiver of his time. If anything, he was the greatest receiver of his generation, and universally the greatest receiver of all time. This guy's legacy and his numbers are light years ahead of everybody else. You know what I mean? And like I said, the gap between him and second and third place is just like as far out as the Grand Canyon. It's about as far as DC is to like California. And I say that with all due respect to your Randy Mosses and TOs and guys like that. But like I say, for him to maintain this consistency, maintain that kind of longevity, that speaks to his work ethic, that speaks to his drive, that speaks to his desire to be the absolute best he could be. And he was the absolute best and still is the absolute greatest till this very day. And he was unanimously selected to the NFL's 100 all-time team. First ballot Hall of Famer, class of 2010. Over the course, sorry about that. First ballot Hall of Famer, class of 2010. You can make an argument that's probably you can make an argument as the greatest class of all time, as he went in with Emmitt Smith, all-time leading receiver, all-time leading rusher, in the Hall of Fame at the same time. How often do you see that in our lifetime? So anyway, here are the numbers. Over the course of a 20-year career in 284 games, this guy had 1,549 receptions, 22,895 yards, 197 receiving touchdowns. And if you add some of the other touchdowns, might as well be over 200. And so and if anything, there's no surprise. The fact that as a receiver, he has nearly 23,000 receiving yards. Like I said, this dude was absolute world beater. And you can make a case as him being arguably the greatest overall player in the history of the game. And number one, I've already read off his accolades, second to none, Jerry Rice. So, of course, the GOAT himself, Jerry Rice, is number one. No surprise at all. So let me, like I said, of course, as I do with any list, I'm going to go ahead and name, name the entire list from 10 to 1. Number 10, Lance Allworth. Number 9, Steve Largent. Number 8, Marvin Harrison. Number 7, Don Hudson. Number 6, Chris Carter. Number 5, Calvin Johnson. Number 4, Larry Fitzgerald. Number 3, Terrell Owens. Number 2, Randy Moss. Number 1, Jerry Rice. And that, ladies and gentlemen, are my top 10 receivers in NFL history.